Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Hot Routes here on Purple Insider. Matthew Coller along with Jonathan Harrison. And we are finally done with the NFL drafts. And Jonathan, even though the Vikings in particular have a lot of questions still to be resolved, as we've gone over many times, Dalvin Cook, Zadarius Smith, Danielle Hunter, all these guys, we're still waiting to find out exactly what happens there. And then Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah pulled the pin on a grenade and dropped it on everybody that the door is not shut to a Kirk Cousins extension. Thanks for doing that, Kwesi, leaving us with even more confusion about who will be the future quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. When that last draft pick is made, you just think, wow, we spent a lot of time leading up to that. It has the very same feeling of the Super Bowl, where by the end of the 2 weeks, we are absolutely ready for the Super Bowl. And on this case, it paid off. I mean, it was a dramatic draft. There was lots of intrigue, quarterbacks at the top that nobody knew exactly where they were going to go. And we'll talk about the one who fell the most here. But, I would say that overall, the draft paid off and it was one of the highest rated on TV. I think, of course, the quarterback intrigue played a huge role in that. Big trades and the Texans moving up and the Cardinals stacking draft capital. It was interesting. Did you have fun?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the draft night stream on the Purple Insider channel was outstanding, 4 hours, and so many people joined. So thank you all who tuned in for that. It was great. It was the drama of not knowing who was going to go where, what the Texans were going to do at 2. And then they take the quarterback like nobody kind of thought they would leading up to the draft. And then all of a sudden they're right back there trading up back into the 3rd spot. It was incredible. It started off incredible. It kept going throughout the night and throughout the weekend. It was so much fun. That crowd in Kansas City, give it up to them, because turning out for all 3 days, massive crowds all 3 days. There's some diehard football fans down there and across this country that are willing to just travel to the middle of the country and just watch people say names for 3 days. It's incredible what this country does for football and what the NFL does to this country.
I was laughing pretty hard when I don't know which team. I think it might have been the Saints, and where they were showing the fans as the Saints are on the clock and on day 3. Okay. So at that point, no one in the crowd knows anyone whose name is getting called unless you are an absolute nut. And they're showing a guy and he's dressed up like, I don't know, the Pope or something. And they announce like this guard from Eastern Michigan. And the guy just high fives his face. Yeah, we got our guy. Like, yeah. I'm not sure what person goes for day 3. I mean, they did make it a heck of a festival. And I have to say, I was very surprised. We were doing the Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah conference call, and I look up on my TV on NFL Network, and there is John 5, who is one of the greatest guitar players alive, just shredding away. And I was like, they turned this thing into a whole bonanza. So I guess I can understand that part, but it did make me laugh of like, they'd show a fan reaction shot and they'd be like, yes, a tight end. Like if you're a Patriots fan, were you cheering them trading up for a kicker? But they were no matter, they could have said anybody. They could have said, I'm not going to name it. They could have said anybody, and those fans were going to cheer. So it was a very strange thing to watch. I mean, you and I sort of laughed about the flyover, the national anthem before reading names. It's just like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
A game? No. Any sort of thing that involves sports? No.
Those fans who are cheering every name, like in the 3rd round, wearing their team's garb and everything, those are paid for fans, right? There's no way those are actual fans losing their mind over Kenny McIntosh being drafted in the 7th round by whoever he was drafted by. It's no way by the Seattle Seahawks. There's no way any Seahawks fan is losing their mind over a running back being drafted in the 7th round that they've never heard of. They've got to be paid for fans, right?
Paid actor fans is a pretty funny concept. So anyway, well, let's get into what we've got to break down this draft. And I think we have to start in the most interesting thing that happened, which was poor Will Levis and his mom and his girlfriend got more TV time than anyone who was actually picked on day 1. boy, ESPN and NFL Network, they just love a train wreck, right? That is
Oh,
their
yeah.
favorite thing. Let's keep showing the guy who's having the worst night of his life here, not getting picked in the first round, Will Levis. And he continued to drop and drop and drop and drop. And then he ends up being taken very early on day 2. And of course, I saw some pretty insane takes. He left. Now, I don't know what his plans were. I mean, maybe he had only bought one hotel room. The guy was being told he was going to be taken 4th overall by everybody in the mock universe, the draft analysts. So maybe he didn't get 2 nights in the hotel and just decided to say, screw it. Because, hey, look, his paycheck is way less than he thought it was going to be. So if he paid for the whole family to come down, maybe he didn't want to pay for them to stay again for another night. I don't know. I don't blame a guy for doing that. But here's what I want to know. So he was taken 33rd. He wasn't taken 268th, okay? So he was just outside of the second round. That means a lot of the time, or out of the first round. So that means a lot of those teams that are quarterback needy certainly could have selected him based on his caliber of prospect, right? And his upside that was being hyped up and everything else. So what I want to know from you is that if Will Levis becomes good, and he did go to a team that is probably going to sit him for a year and then take over as the Titans quarterback, if he looks even halfway competent, doesn't look like it's going to be hard to pass Malik Willis on that depth chart. So if he takes over there, under Mike Vrabel is a pretty good coach. They run lots of play action. They run the ball a lot, becomes this play action beast. He's an excellent quarterback. He's winning games. He's taking over the AFC South. And everyone's going to look around and go, wait a minute, who should have picked him? Because there's a lot of teams that should have picked Jalen Hurts, for example, or Lamar Jackson, for example. So who will have the biggest regrets if Will Levis becomes a very good quarterback?
I'm going to go with the team that drafted 8th overall, the Atlanta Falcons. They drafted a running back in the top 10 because they will always be the team. Yes, there are, 20 teams after them that passed on him as well, but they'll always be the team that passed on a quarterback who ended up being really good and passed on him for a running back who, as we all know, the draft value or the player value or the positional value just isn't there at that position. They will always be the team that stuck around at 8, didn't trade down, didn't take the quarterback, and ended up taking a running back. No matter how good Bijan Robinson ends up being, they'll always still be the team that drafted a running back instead of taking somebody who could have been their franchise quarterback. That's if Will Levis turns out, which this question is based around. So yeah, they'll always be the team that passed on a franchise quarterback in favor of a running back, which will be criticized from here until the end of time.
Well, especially since they were one of the best running teams in the NFL last year without this gentleman. So I have no doubt that he's good at football, but we'll get into that a little bit. I think that's a great selection, and probably the easiest one to make there is, I mean, are you really buying into Desmond Ritter this much? And look, he could turn out to be very good. We don't know. He only played a little last year. But and your first impression of Jalen Hurts was certainly not that he was going to be a superstar, or many other quarterbacks. I mean, even Joe Burrow had a pretty tough rookie year. Josh Allen had a couple of years where he wasn't good and then developed. So I do believe it takes a few years to figure it out. And maybe they want that from Desmond Ritter. Maybe they like him that much, what they've seen behind the scenes. I remember when it was really shocking when the Seattle Seahawks played Russell Wilson over Matt Flynn, who they had acquired in the offseason. And that was the big criticism of them drafting him. It was like, why are they drafting this Russell Wilson character when they have Matt Flynn as their franchise quarterback? And then he passed by him and became, a Hall of Fame type of quarterback. So maybe they think that is what they have in Desmond Ritter, as somebody who is they've seen behind the scenes and they're really confident in. But I also think, how likely is that a 3rd round pick in Desmond Ritter is going to become like the next Russell Wilson, even if he has advantageous weapons around him? Passing on Will Levis, if he becomes good, is a very key part of this question. Who's going to have the most regrets? I personally think that, maybe Atlanta should have gone with a pass rusher, maybe another wide receiver to pair. We don't know what Drake London's going to be. Kyle Pitts hasn't really worked out yet. Maybe that was a trade down, take Jackson Smith-Njigba. Like there's a lot of other positions they could have taken there, or even And it's hard to say with Jalen Carter why some teams didn't want him, but Jalen Carter was on the board at that point, and that team has a pretty bad defense. So yes, if you drafted the least valuable position or hardest versus the hardest to replace and the most valuable in quarterback, you are going to look pretty silly. I would also go with another team that is going to start a quarterback from the 2022 draft class, which is the Washington Commanders. I mean, look, I liked Sam Howell coming out in the draft last year. I was alone on an island, I guess, and the NFL said, no, he's nothing there. And there probably isn't, to tell you the truth. He has kind of like Baker Mayfield vibes, and, maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. Maybe they want to draft Caleb Williams or Drake May next year, and that's why Washington is just going to start a 5th-round pick and try to tank and see what happens. I don't think so, though. Like, their team is not horrendous. They were able to stay competitive with Taylor Heineke. You would think that they would just be a quarterback away. So if Levis becomes good and they said, no, we're going to stay with Sam Howell, the crazy, like, look at the quarterbacks in Washington since Kirk. That franchise is so unbelievably inept at finding quarterbacks. So you're going to pass on an opportunity to potentially take your next franchise quarterback to take a corner. And I like the corner, but it looks like they reached on the corner like crazy. I mean, Emmanuel Forbes was a good playmaker in college, but he was projected mostly as a late 1st or 2nd round pick because he's extremely undersized. So if you passed on a quarterback with high upside to take a cornerback, then we are absolutely going to roll our eyes and be like, oh, come on, you've got to be kidding me. How did you guys miss that? And again, I just want to say this is only if he becomes great, who we're going to second guess. If we're giving our real opinions on Will Levis, mine is, I don't think it's ever really going to work for him. And there's a reason why everybody let him slide, because he's the big-armed, inaccurate guy that has failed over and over again. And I think actually this is where we got tricked a little bit with Josh Allen, because we thought that was him, but the league sort of knew more that he deserved to be a top pick. But the league is seeing Brady Quinn here and letting this guy drop. They're seeing Drew Lock. They're seeing way too many flaws with Will Levis to think he's a 1st-round pick. But it's not like it was far outside of the 1st round. It was like 33rd. That's Colin Kaepernick. That's Derek Carr type of area where we have seen some successful quarterbacks before. So it's only if he becomes good, who are we going to second guess, which takes us, Jonathan, to the Minnesota Vikings. And should they be on this list of teams that will have to look themselves in the mirror and say, what did we miss with Will Levis? If he becomes great, will they have regrets?
I think, yeah, because they've put themselves in a spot with this competitive rebuild and not really wanting to go into full tank mode. And with the players they have, there's no way they're going to be high enough to get Caleb Williams next year. There's no way they're going to be high enough to get either of those top 2 quarterbacks this year. They're going to win at least probably 8 games. So they're going to be at least in the teens. That's not going to be really high enough to get one of those top quarterbacks in next year's draft. So they'll have to look for either extending Kirk Cousins, which I know the whole Vikings fan base is groaning very, very loudly, or they're going to have to find a bridge quarterback to get them through a year where it's not going to look good. And then you're going to try and have to convince Justin Jefferson, hey, just wait here. We've got someone coming next year. And are you going to be able to convince a guy who's that good, who only wants to win, that, yeah, we've got a plan. It's going to come together next year. They've painted themselves into a really tough corner here, that if Will Levis turns out to be a really good franchise quarterback, there's going to be a lot of question marks, no matter how good Jordan Addison turns out to be. And if it turns out you have another 3 deep with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and KJ Osborne, if it turns out you have that, it doesn't matter if you don't have a quarterback throwing to them. They will be questioned why they didn't take Will Levis if it turns out he turns out to be good.
100%. 100% they will. And again, it just can't be said enough. This is clearly second guessing, because I don't, or would be if he becomes successful, because I don't have a problem with them actually passing on Will Levis. And I think that when you look historically at this type of quarterback, there have been very few who have succeeded that the whole league decides is just not accurate enough to be able to be a starter. And we talked about leading up, like, who were the comparisons? Brady Quinn, Blaine Gabbert, Jake Locker, all those guys were kind of brought up because they all have those similar traits where physically they're very impressive, big, strong dudes with big arms, but not necessarily good enough to really play in the league. And a lot of times the NFL does identify these players pretty well. And, Jordan Love might be this guy as well. He was another one with a big arm, didn't have great stats, dropped in the draft for a reason because there were these flaws. And I think that the draft analysts who believed he was going to be a top pick, they believed that because of what they had seen after 2021. And they ignored way too much of 2022 or excused way too much of 2022 and said, well, it's this, well, it's that. But I think that he had some major issues with even figuring out like where to throw the ball. And the other thing is too, that's very important here. And there might be some Sam Darnold kind of comparison, although Darnold was a better prospect. But, the thing with Sam Darnold is he turned the ball over a ton in college. And everybody excused it. They were like, no, he's got a great arm and whatever. He's got a great arm. And Jameis Winston is the same way. The league is always learning and their data is always telling them things. And one of the things that has been noticeable in the numbers is if you turn the ball over a ton and you make a lot of negative plays, that will likely carry over to the NFL. And that was something that, by the way, I really liked about Anthony Richardson's, that he almost never took sacks. He didn't have a ton of bad interceptions. And so even though he was inaccurate on some passes, and clearly the NFL felt this way, so even though he was inaccurate in some areas, he was not reckless or crazy with the football or making these horrendous throws that were getting picked. He just needs to make some improvements, maybe footwork or whatever, and execution. But with Levis, it was negative plays all over the place. He got sacked. He was horrible under pressure. All those things. I mean, those add up. And I think that if the Vikings were looking at that and saying, look, it's not just inaccuracy, it's bad decisions, it's bad throws on, interceptions and inaccuracy, like these are kind of like broad terms. Will Levis would throw interceptions on like 10-yard in routes, like routes that should be open and easy execution. This wasn't just him forcing the ball into tight windows or something and missing. This was easy stuff. So it probably, the writing should have been on the wall for a lot of people that he wasn't going to be considered with those other three top prospects. However, if these things get resolved, I don't think they will. If they get resolved, we are certainly going to go back and say, well, and the same thing goes for, we do this with Lamar Jackson and the Vikings, where it's 2018. And yeah, I know you signed Kirk, but this project quarterback looks amazing. And maybe you should just pick him because it's the most important position. Maybe just take a swing. So yes, it will be second guessing. I will also say with Hendon Hooker as well, he didn't drop so far that you would like exclude him from this conversation because both of these guys were connected to the Vikings leading up. They both decided, no, we're not going to do it. So we will second guess the heck out of them if it happens. And I would also add too, Jonathan, there's another team that maybe low key should have considered this that didn't get talked about at all. And that is the New York Giants. Like the New York Giants signed Daniel Jones to a very short-term contract because he was literally good for 1 year. And so they just were saying like, oh, we need a corner more, which, I'm sure you do, but you're really resting it on Daniel Jones. And if he becomes good, I think we would say, why were you so committed to Daniel Jones at this point? Like that's the theme for the other teams is why were you committed to these other guys when you knew that there was a possibility in the future? But of course, on draft night, you always need to get like your guy that's going to help right away in the first round or you're going to get criticized. So the answer is absolutely yes. We will second guess and we will look at history and say, man, this is Johnny Flynn and Steph Curry, huh?
Yeah.
But by the logic of their process, I think it's very fair that they did not go with Will Levis.
Yeah, I think another team outside of the couple that we've named might actually be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yes, I like the pick of Kalijah Kancey, but you brought in Baker Mayfield to basically be a bridge quarterback. You signed him to what, a 1-year deal based off a couple games with the Rams, and he hasn't been that great in his tenure in the NFL. So you clearly need a quarterback for the future in Tampa Bay. You still got good weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and you don't have a quarterback for the future for the long term to be throwing to those guys. And that's a very, I love the Kalijah Kancey pick. I think that's a great pick for them on that defense, but not picking your quarterback in the first round if Will Levis turns out is going to be very questionable for them.
Jonathan says, not you, Jonathan, commenter Jonathan, if we draft Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Michael Penix, I don't think we'll regret passing on Will Levis. I guess I didn't know Michael Penix was in this conversation. You want to talk about old quarterbacks? Like, that guy's probably going to be like 25 when he comes out. He's got this crazy spread offense. He throws the ball all over the place, very much in the Hendon Hooker kind of way, where it's like, is that his offense or is that him? But I mean, I guess we'll see if people think that he's a first round pick. I kind of don't think so. But to your point, if they end up drafting someone that they like in 2024 and it works out for them, yeah, of course, like that. And I think that if that's their logic, is they just didn't believe in either one of these guys and they like what they see because they know what's coming in 2024. They are aware and they've already projected what they could possibly pick in 2024 based on all the different positions that they could finish, what their options are. They're going to go through those scenarios, and they clearly felt like there was better options for them to wait next season. And, you know, I think that that's probably the right thing to do. And also your options open up for any other unhappy quarterbacks who might want jobs. And I don't know if I brought this up out loud or just in my brain, but like if Kyler Murray was unhappy or something, and I know people are down on Kyler Murray, but like, let's consider that, you know, in 2021, halfway through the year, the guy was being talked about as the MVP of the league. Right. Mm-hmm. And that franchise was an absolute nothing before he got there and got to a division title and was, you know, a top team in the NFC in 2021. And their general manager was an absolute fool. And their head coach, I think, kept running back the same offense and whatever. But like Kyler Murray with Justin Jefferson sounds pretty good. I don't know how it would all work out. But my point is just you never know who's going to come out of nowhere. I'm not floating a Kyler Murray to Vikings rumor. I'm just saying that these things do happen. So I think that the consensus on this is that every team that was not locked into their future quarterback, if he becomes good, every one of those fan bases is going to be like, what?
Yeah.
What is it that you didn't see that the mock drafters and the draft analysts did see in Will Levis that resulted in that? And that's what's so great about the, when it comes to the NFL draft. That's what's so great is that it always leaves us with these what ifs and this team should have and whatever. And no better day, by the way, than today, which was for the fifth year options for teams to pick up the fifth year option. Shockingly, the Vikings picked up Justin Jefferson's. It must have been a tough decision, probably a lot of meetings on that one. But you go back and look at that draft and it's like, oh my gosh, that's right. That team picked that guy, whatever, you know? So that's what makes it so great. Anyway, next question here, Jonathan. What was your favorite team's draft and the most surprising thing for you outside of Will Levis?
My favorite draft was probably, it's split between the Seahawks and the Cardinals. And I know everybody's praising what they did. The reason why I love what the Cardinals did, they traded out of 3 and they got an absolute haul for it, including what's most likely going to be the number 1 pick in next year's draft. So they put themselves in a perfect position that if Kyler Murray proves to just not be a great quarterback and it wasn't all Cliff Kingsbury's fault, they can move on and draft Caleb Williams and get the next Lincoln Riley quarterback to try things out in the NFL. Or if Kyler Murray turns out to be a really good quarterback and they don't need that number 1 overall pick, they have perfect trade bait there to dangle in front of someone who's going to give them another haul that they can just keep trading and getting more draft capital, and they can probably trade down, or they can just sit up there and draft a wide receiver and probably draft Marvin Harrison Jr. as the number 1 overall pick next year and give Kyler Murray a heck of a weapon to throw to. I love what they did in stockpiling for next year and getting Kyler Murray some help on that offensive line, which he desperately needed. And then going with the quantity over quality in the secondary, which they needed help with after losing a couple guys, grabbing a couple cornerbacks. But I really loved as well what Seattle did, getting the best cornerback and the best wide receiver in this class all in the first round. You already had a really good draft last year, getting Tariq Woolen as and he turned out to be a really good cornerback. Now you have Devin Witherspoon, who doesn't have to be the number one corner. He can come in there and be the number two and be one of the better cornerbacks in this league if he proves out to be as good as he was thought of coming into this draft. And then adding Jackson Smith-Njigba to that wide receiver core alongside what they already have in that receiver core, that is incredible what Geno Smith will have to throw to this season.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly win the draft when you get all the draft picks of another team to use, and Seattle certainly got that. Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to they got Derek Hall in the second round, who was kind of a fringe late first round pass rusher as well. They absolutely crushed it. But again, you got all the draft picks from the class. Smith-Njigba was my favorite pick out of there. No surprise. As you know, I'm always advocating wide receivers, but they didn't just get a receiver. They got the best receiver in the whole draft at that position, which I think is very surprising. A lot of teams passing on the wide receiver class, I think because they look for perfect receivers and don't look for good. And then you saw the run in the late first, and you got a lot of good receivers. I like the Chargers picking Quentin Johnston. I think Justin Herbert likes to throw short passes, and this guy will run after the catch with the ball. So they kind of got the right fit for their quarterback. You know, I will say this, that, I mean, Pittsburgh is an easy choice here. They get Joey Porter Jr. to start the second round. I mean, that is an absolute steal. They get maybe we'll see, but like the best tackle or a really good tackle prospect in Broderick Jones. But I'm going to throw this out there, and it might be controversial. I don't know. We'll see. I think the Texans did great. I mean, I think that trade up was fine, because I know the draft capital freaks, they love their draft capital. They love nothing more than, oh my gosh. And, you know, look, trading the next year's first is pretty darn risky. But I also think that when you win a Super Bowl, right, go back and look at the roster. And what do you find? What you find is superstars. You find Aaron Donald. You find Cooper Kupp. You find dudes who set records and dudes who are absolute monster freak shows. And they don't have any of that. And so, like, at some point, you have to start getting those guys. I mean, they have, you know, some good players there who they've drafted high, but I mean, they need to draft freaks. And I understand. Maybe you would say, well, Anderson's not freaky enough or whatever. They should have just waited around, taken Smith-Njigba or something else. But I think you need those pieces to be a true winning team. So I liked it. And I really like them picking CJ Stroud, not messing around and picking a defensive player and just hoping somebody fell or settling or whatever else. So I thought that they got two of the biggest key positions to try to actually win a Super Bowl, even if they did it in like kind of a crazy way a little bit by trading up. But you need those players. So I actually like that, and I actually would defend that. I think that trade worked really well for both teams. And I would also say, too, that the Carolina Panthers getting a wide receiver in the second round, Jonathan Mingo, who is a really good prospect. So they didn't just get their number one overall quarterback, but they also grabbed somebody in the second round. And we've seen plenty of second round wide receivers who have turned out really, really liked what they did as well. I think the biggest surprise, and it's being talked about a lot, but biggest surprise is what the Lions did. I mean, going for a running back and a linebacker, really ignoring positional value, and pretty much just saying, we think that we're a Super Bowl team and we can just fill these needs right away with these picks. I don't think it's a real smart approach. They could both become great players and key players to a Super Bowl run for the Lions. It's always possible, but I also think I'm not really convinced this was the right way to go. But the Lions have been, under Brad Holmes, a pretty sharp team. Like, going for fourth downs, they use their analytics department. Their analytics department must have been like, what do you guys do? What are we doing? Didn't we talk about this? I thought we discussed this. This is not what you do. No, the opposite. Did you get the wrong report? Did we push the wrong export button on our analytics sheets? So that was clearly, to me, other than Will Levis dropping, the biggest surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about it during the live stream that I was baffled by what the Lions did. It concerns me for a team that has all the opportunity in the world to take the NFC North by the reins. Now that Aaron Rodgers is gone, depending on what the Vikings do this year, it seems like the Lions should be the best team in the division. And they kind of fumbled the bag here. They just kind of let it all kind of go. And by trading down, it seemed like, oh man, they're going to do some good things here with these draft picks, get more draft picks and more draft accumulation. And they didn't. They picked a running back at a spot where he probably would have been there 6 picks later, and then they draft a linebacker who probably shouldn't have gone where he went. It's confusing, especially with who was on the board still for the Lions to pick. Kalijah Kancey was there. Could you imagine that defensive line of Aiden Hutchinson and Kalijah Kancey? No offensive line in the NFC North is stopping that week in and week out. I would have loved to see.
Oh, you lost your microphone there for a second, Jonathan.
GMs getting mad about.
Jonathan, you might have to unplug and plug your microphone back in. You sort of went in and out there for a second. But I assume you continued to make fun of the Lions, and I agree with that. But try talking again. Do I got you now?
Yeah, does this work now?
Oh, yeah, you're good. Okay, we can hear you now. So, yeah, I mean, now I think that Kalijah Kancey is the most questionable there. But even if they had taken Van Ness, I mean, pairing Hutchinson with another pass rusher, that would kind of be the San Francisco model. They could have used another wide receiver. I mean, they're trying to load up as much as they can on their offense. The only thing they really didn't need is the offensive lineman, but Kancey is the one. If he becomes a great interior rusher, we're going to look at that and go, huh? Because they did fix their cornerback group, but everything is kind of tenuous, right? Like, you fixed your cornerback group for now, but how much in the future, I don't really know. I'm intrigued by what the Packers did because they did take a receiver in the second round, and he might turn out to be decent. Going with the pass rusher in the first round, I thought was a little questionable versus Smith-Njigba, but we've also seen plenty of second rounders turn out well. They love drafting tight ends. I don't really think that that's the greatest use of their draft capital, but they did invest in a few shots at wide receiver, which obviously I would advocate. And then the Bears just went solid. Like, they just made sure let's get a tackle. Let's get a Tyler Scott's an intriguing pick for them, kind of like Darnell Mooney 2.0. Exactly the same guy, actually. Super fast and twitchy, but undersized. So, yeah, I mean, that was definitely the biggest surprise, though, I think, was them going there. And probably also falls under the category of, like, the Texans making that trade was a pretty big stunner as well. So let me skip forward. We kind of touched on the running back thing a little bit there, but who do you think is drafting number 1 next season to get Caleb Williams, presumably?
I think right now the leader in the clubhouse has got to be Arizona because they have Houston's pick. I don't think Houston, as you said, that cupboard is completely bare. I don't think they're going to be any good despite picking twice in the top 3 and getting a good quarterback and getting a good outside linebacker in those 2 picks. But I just don't think they're going to be that good. And they gave up their first round pick to Arizona, who's going to be right there to take them. Other teams that it could be, it's hard to say. I mean, I think the Houston Texans are clearly the front runner to be the worst team in the league just because there's just no one there. No team is really popping out to me like that Houston Texans team, which is given to the Cardinals with that pick. That screams going to be the first round pick. The Falcons might be a shot. I don't know exactly off the top of my head if they have their first round pick. I believe they do, but not taking a quarterback, trusting that Desmond Ritter is going to be their guy, that could prove to be a bad situation there. Those 2 teams kind of scream it to me the most.
I think almost everyone except the Jaguars in that division in the AFC South has a chance because with the Colts, I mean, the thing that gets said about Anthony Richardson is that he should probably sit a year, but Gardner Minshew's their other quarterback. Like, are you going to bother with that? I mean, I like Gardner Minshew as a backup.
Fans aren't going to sit and wait for that forever.
All right. And if they start Minshew to start the season because he wins the camp job, what do you give that, like 4 weeks? I mean, that always happens. Nathan Peterman started the year that Josh Allen took over as a rookie. I mean, it never it makes any sense to start that veteran quarterback. So if Richardson starts and he struggles a lot, like, that's not a good football team. It's not like they've got weapons all over. I suppose if Jonathan Taylor is healthy, that can help them, but I'm not sure. Like, you saw what they were last year, one of the worst teams in the NFL. That's how they got here. There's no guarantee their head coach knows what he's doing. I mean, he was just a coordinator before, so it's not like you hired a accomplished former coach from somewhere else, like a Mike McCarthy, one of your favorites, John. But McCarthy though, I mean, he's been a good coach for Detroit or for Dallas. Like that's the thing is that when you hire someone who's already been a coach, they can do the job. Yeah. We don't know that the new Colts coach can do the job, so they could be really horrendous. The Texans certainly could be awful. I think that they will improve. That's just my guess. But I think that almost anything is up for grabs there, including the Titans. Like if you were the Titans, look at their roster right now. Tell me that team can win anything. I think that what they should do is they should trade Ryan Tannehill to the Atlanta Falcons or the Washington Commanders, and they should start either Malik Willis or Will Levis. And then if they're horrible, well, if Levis can't beat out Malik Willis, that's a problem. Yikes, and then just be like, who cares that we drafted him 33rd? We're taking Caleb Williams. But this could be a tankathon, right? And just the AFC South, and the Jacksonville Jaguars will dance to the division title like Deion Sanders into the end zone. I mean, it's just, it is a very, very bad division. I do think that the one team would be the Texans that has a chance to be better than that. But I don't know, just because they're bringing in a more competent coach, but I'm not really sure. And just look at the rest of the AFC. I mean, your schedule for every team is going to be an absolute nightmare. Aside from that, it is kind of hard to pick out like an NFC team outside of maybe the Falcons or the Cardinals. I mean, sometimes it comes down to whose quarterback gets hurt. Well, who could low key end up being there? The Green Bay Packers.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. If Jordan Love is horrible, they have no one else. I think that Danny Etling, who once spent like 2 weeks on the Vikings practice squad when Kirk Cousins got COVID or something, like I think that is the only guy who is their backup right now. I could be wrong, but I don't think they have like a proven backup veteran. It's all on Jordan Love. And the way that they worked his 5th-year option out was to basically give them the flexibility to cut him if they want to after this year. They gave him the cash that he would get as a 5th-year option, but they said, we want the option to move on from you, which means big giant, we don't really believe in you for sure kind of flag. I think it would not be, how funny would that be though? So the Vikings finally get rid of Aaron Rodgers. Everybody says, whoopee, this is amazing. And then they freaking draft Caleb Williams.
They go from having almost 3 decades of having Hall of Fame quarterback to play to going immediately to being the worst team in the league. That'd be gold for Vikings fans.
From Stewart, I hope the Packers don't get the first pick. I'll just move to Antarctica. Like the guy, like the Vikings fans in the draft, the guy who read the pick. I don't know where he was, in Canada or something. That was amazing. Like great view of his backyard. But don't count it out, I guess. If you were picking from all the teams, really the Commanders though. Yeah. Commanders. Yeah, Commanders for sure. I mean, they might actually be tanking by doing that. Maybe they were told by their new ownership, we're not investing in any quarterbacks. Lose all the games you can. The new owners get to take the top draft pick. Maybe that's a thing. I don't know. Last thing for you, Jonathan, since we went through it all with the draft, we had every possible take that has ever been said ever of all time. I would love to know what you would want to do differently out of the draft, like whether it's the lead up or whether it's the actual NFL draft, the broadcast. I have to shout out to NFL Network's broadcast for just showing meat constantly on day 3. It was like player pick, meat. There were puppies at one point, meat. I was like, okay, I'm into this. Having been to Kansas City and enjoyed myself, some of their barbecue, it is different. It is just absolutely different. So shout out to them for that. What would you change, though, about the whole NFL draft?
I'm not going to go, I believe it was Pro Football Talk saying we should probably add another round because people are getting upset with the undrafted free agency thing. I do not want another round in this draft. I think 7 is just fine. We don't need less. 7 is almost the perfect number for rounds in the NFL draft. I'm going to go with one that we've kind of talked about a little bit over the past couple weeks. Push it up a week. I'm thinking about it. I'm not really the biggest fan of moving it before free agency. I kind of like how the schedule is right now. I like having the draft after free agency, but I could probably be swayed on that. At least move it up a week, if not two, because it just gets played out too many times or too long. There are too many ridiculous storylines that get thrown out there just to keep people interested in the NFL. Just put it up a week, put it back to where it used to be, and let's get the thing started. I know the NFL wants to do it so it drags out their calendar, so there's still people talking about it every single week of the year. They're going to talk about it anyways. We just saw 100,000 people plus show up to Kansas City to watch people get their names said in front of a podium. Like, they're going to show up and they're going to talk about your sport no matter what. Just have it the week before, get it over with, because the teams already know everything they need to know by that point. They're not going to find something else out in that extra week that they didn't know before. So for me, it's push it up a week at least, if not two.
So I've got two ideas. Number one is, to every broadcast, look, it's time to have an actual analytics person on your broadcast. If you're just going to be like, I don't care what the analytics say, football, like, okay, but can we have someone actually who is knowledgeable about this stuff? There's enough people who could actually, when a team trades down, there are people who could pull up these analytics sheets and be like, here's who won this trade by the value. Yeah. Here's all what they got back. Not just a bunch of former football guys being like, great trade. And you're like, okay, but like, we have numbers for this.
Right.
We have ways to know if this is a good trade, and be like, I don't care what anybody says. Bijan Robinson, he's the best. You're like, okay, that opinion is fine to have on the broadcast, but why not have the other opinion breaking down why it's not a good draft pick, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is it only Kuiper, some other dude who's a draft analyst, football man, other football man? Like, why don't we have other people that could be representing opinions? Also, too, ESPN has 32 NFL reporters covering their teams, and we don't hear from them. Like, that's weird to me that they don't throw it to, like, hey, this is the person with the most knowledge about what they did. Why is that person not come on to maybe talk about what they did? Give them 30 seconds to just give their take. Like, great pick. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like you should, the people who are on the ground there with the team would know better, because you hear a lot of things being said, even when it's like the Vikings, where you go, I'm not sure if that's really true. Yeah. And whoever's here, Kevin Seifert, would know. So I feel like they should utilize some of the talent that they have better on the broadcast. Here, that's my just basic, here's some advice for you. Since they've got a big enough budget for the draft to have people on. But my totally outlandish suggestion would be, you know how in UDFA, everybody gets to bid, right? Yep. So Andre Carter for the Vikings got $340,000, which is very nice for him. Yep. And that's the most I've ever heard of anybody getting for a UDFA. So what if the whole thing was a bidding war? What if in the lead up to the draft that day, you had to bid for spots in the draft, and you had to bid cap space? So, like, let's just say that, well, you're the Vikings, you're drafting 32nd, but you had to bid cap space for the rights to take these picks. So all 32 are on the board. All 32 teams have whatever their cap situation is, and then they have to make bids. And then they can trade with each other or whatever else. This team bidded higher than you. You could give them a draft pick, whatever else. So each draft slot is like going to be obviously more. So you could bid, if you are the Chicago Bears, for the number one pick, and then get it. So you could have like a whole event that was bidding night, and then you could have a separate event that was the draft that also included changes or trades and stuff. And then that's the order for the rest. So teams who are really confident in themselves could be like, we're not bidding any of our cap space. Or teams could set up their salary cap for a future knowing that it's time to trade up. This would be absolute insanity, total complete madness of these teams with that event. And then the additional NFL draft. So then you could be saying this team bid that much for the 4th overall pick only to take that guy. Like, it would leave a whole other bunch of questions and economics arguments and analytics debates and everything else. I think that would be super fun to change the draft into a giant bidding war. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think it would be really cool.
I think it'd be awesome, especially if you place it before free agency. So these teams know they're giving up cap space to use that they would be able to use in free agency. That would be incredible. And somehow, despite all of those changes, the Eagles would still win every draft because Howie Roseman's a genius and wins every single draft and pisses off the other 31 general managers because he constantly gets praised because they keep letting him win every draft. It's just ridiculous. But I would love that idea. It would be incredible drama to have them as like two separate nights where, as you said, the bidding is in one night and then they go and get to have time to prepare for who they're going to take. That would be incredible. That would be so much fun. It's probably never going to happen because it's a little too out there for the NFL, who won't even change their kickoff for the better. But I would love to see that. That would be incredible.
Yeah, I don't think it will. And plus, this is a very popular model, and it really works. But it would be fascinating, teams that made decisions, and the NFLPA would probably hate it because they'd be saying, well, teams aren't spending money on their actual players because they're doing this. But if you had to pay the player whatever you bid for right. And so you get, like if you were bidding $20 million, but it would have to be, here would be the great thing though. It would have to be a blind bid. So you don't know what anybody else bid. So isn't this great? Like you're saying like, what if the Bears bid 20 mil for the first pick and the next best team bid 5?
Yeah.
Like, oh no, we like way overshot it and didn't even realize or something. So I don't know. I think that would be pretty cool. I like what Aaron said. This would be kind of fun if it was a snake draft. And, if you're so you get 32 and 33, that would be pretty cool. There are other ways that you can make it more fair. And, I don't care for lottery systems. It's not necessary for me for football, but I think that there's more creative things that we could do with the draft. So anyway, well, good stuff, Jonathan. And thanks everybody for, jumping in the comments and stuff. And we'll see how it all plays out with the draft. We'll continue to be here on Tuesday nights with Hot Routes and the Purple Insider podcast and all the book promotions I'll be doing and everything else to be obnoxious about that. And we will go from there. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you again very soon.